Good morning, guys. Today we're going to write a percent as a decimal. So let's start off with number one. All right, so here's our first problem. 13% turned into 0 and 1300ths. And down here I show you guys how I did that by first turning the percent into a fraction. And then I read it like I taught you guys to read fractions before, and that is 13 divided by 100. So here on this side is what I did. I did 13 divided by 100. But 100 does not go into 13, and that's when the decimals come in. And as you can see in the next step, I wrote 100 divided into 13 and 0 hundredths, or 13.00. And then I did my division and started out with 100. How many times does 100 go into 13? 0. So I moved on to the next one, which would be how many times does 100 go into 130? It goes into it only one time. 1 times 100 gives me 100. 130 minus 100 leaves me with 30. Therefore, I brought down the other 0, and that gave me down here 300. And again, I say, how many times does 100 go into 300? Well, it goes 3 times. And here is our answer by the time we're done, because 100 times 3 gives us 300. Therefore, we have no remainder. And that's how we came up with our decimal of 0 and 1300ths. All right, here's number 2. 160% turned into a decimal. And again, I wrote it as a fraction, and I read the fraction 160 divided by 100. So here's my division problem, and I know it's a little bit sketchy, but there is a 6 in there. And then I rewrite the problem using a decimal, right? So on the bottom, the next step, you'll notice that I wrote 160.00, or 160 and 0 hundredths divided by 100. And I did my process of dividing 160 and 0 hundredths by 100. You can see my steps here where I divided each step. And then my result was 1 and 60 hundredths. And I can write that, I rewrote that down here as 160% equals 1 and 60 hundredths, or 1 and 6/10. And the bottom there, I show you the shortcut. And I'm sure some of you guys know the shortcut of simply moving the decimal over 2 times, because 100 only has 2 zeros. So therefore, we move it over 2 times. And on number 1, I show you that shortcut as well, where I moved the decimal over 2 times, and I wound up with 0 and 1300ths. Here on the bottom, I show you as well. All I did is move the decimal over 2 times, and I wind up with 1 and 60 hundredths. So I want you guys to practice the process of turning into a decimal using the division process for number 3. And right now, pause the video and try number 3 and number 4 on your own. All right, here's number 3. So our answer is, and here is number 4.